Hey everyone, we're going to look at some different formulas dealing with linear equations. And we'll also talk about how to find the slope. And we'll eventually get into a little bit of graphing and talking about lines with parallel and perpendicular slopes. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how to find the slope formula, how to use the slope formula. So you'll kind of see this right in the center of the page. Okay. There's different variations of it. You can use a graph, you can use the coordinates to find it. But I'm going to show you the way I show my algebra students, because it refers to the average rate of change. So what I have my algebra students do is I have them take the two coordinates. You got to have two coordinates. I have them write out the coordinates. And then what I have them do is subtract the coordinates. So if I do bottom minus top, it'd be 8 minus 3, which would be 5. And then bottom minus top, 3 minus 5 would be negative 2. And then what you do is you take the y's, the difference in the y's, and divide it by the difference in the x's. So like in this case, it would be negative 2 over 5. And you can always put that in and see if you can reduce it using the, go to the math button in the calculator. It'll help you reduce that fraction. Right? Kind of like, just like this. And you can see if it needs to be reduced or it can be reduced farther. So if I do negative 2 divided by 5, hit the math key. Okay. If it gives you the same thing out, it's already reduced. If it doesn't, then that answer would be reduced. So, now let's move on. The other thing I want to point out is you can see some of the pictures of the slopes. Okay. Part of the assignment will have you talking about, well, it's a positive slope, a negative slope, 0, and undefined. So you'll come across that later on. There's examples of what horizontal lines and vertical lines would be written as, and you might remember this from algebra. But going on to the next page, we're going to look at the distance formula. And again, it's just a variation. It's just a variation of Pythagorean theorem. So what you're trying to do, instead of the a and b, what you're trying to do is you're subtracting the y's and the x's. So it's just y2 minus y1. I'm going to rewrite that. y2 minus... So I find the difference in the y's and the difference in the x's. And that's going to be equal to that hypotenuse squared. So, same thing, you can do what I did for the last problem. Okay? You can do the subtraction, kind of like I just did for the rate of change, except we're not just going to divide these this time, we're going to put them into that formula. So I got 5 minus 1, which would be 4. I got 1 minus negative 2, which would be 3. So like for this one right here, 3 and 4, those would be the legs. That's a leg, and that's a leg of the right triangle. So what it's going to end up being, it's going to be in 3 squared plus 4 squared equals c squared. So like in this case, you get 9 and 16 for 3 and 4 squared, which add up to be 25. And then you take the square root of 25, which ends up being 5. So the answer for this one would be 5 for the distance. Okay. So we're going to move on right now. We'll go to and look at a midpoint question. And again, if we're talking about a midpoint, if I was to draw a segment, label this A and B, the midpoint's going to be right there in the middle. So you'll kind of see the x values and y values be based on an average. So the formula is over here, and what this basically says is you're going to take, and I will label these, you're going to take the x values, and you're going to add those x values together, and divide it by 2 to get an average. And you're going to take the y values, add the y values together, and divide it by 2. So when I add these, I get 1 plus 6, 7. When I add those, I get negative 1. And you could divide it. You could leave it as a fraction. If you left it like that, it's fine. You can, if you want, write it as a decimal, especially if it's a decimal that ends. So that would be we'll call it M. That would be your midpoint, which is a coordinate. Now, the last one I want to look at is actually one of the ones from the assignment. So, if you go to page, in this case it'd be page 3, and it talks about finding M. You know, what you want to do with something like H, I know some people struggle with this, but you're trying to get Y by itself, because you're using the whole Y equals mx plus b to find that slope, because the slope is going to be the value next to M. So I'm just going to do an example over here on the side, just to kind of help you out. Okay, so I'm writing out an equation I just came up with right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get Y by itself. So first I'm going to move the X term, or any other term that's not connected with a Y. So this ends up being negative 2Y equals negative 4X plus 8. And just be careful with that sign. Then I'm going to divide everything by negative 2 to get Y by itself. So now I do negative 4 divided by negative 2, which is positive 2. And then 8 divided by negative 2, which is negative 4. So that would mean for like this question, the slope is going to equal 2. So I hope this helps you with this assignment. Let me know if you need any help. Either send me a message on the YouTube or get a hold of me in class. Thanks.